Hello, everybody, and welcome to our World Today, the Unionist Perspective. Today, we're looking at a few topics that we believe are starting to highlight a couple of trends, and one of those major ones is what is happening with the swing in the German economy. So I'd like to hand over to Sage to give us an introduction on that topic.
Yeah, so you might have heard in the news recently, like different media outlets have been reporting that Germany's economy has been in recession, I think for the entire time this year. And so that means the economy has been shrinking, meaning the value or the amount, but the value of goods and services they produce has been going down, basically. And so simply put, based on what we've been reading, the number one reason for this has been Germany completely swore off of all fossil fuels supplied by Russia because they chose to sanction Russia because they invaded Ukraine. And so they don't want to support Russia's war machine, and they also don't want to fund a country that represents a military threat to them as well, if Russia found a way to do so, And so, yeah, that's been the main problem. And the reason is like Russian fossil fuels, natural gas, coal, and oil are really cheap for Germany. Having to source it from other countries and get liquefied natural gas instead of gaseous natural gas is problematic because you've got to build all of these ports to convert the liquid natural gas into gaseous natural gas that can then be burned safely without exploding in a massive fireball. So they've had to get all of this infrastructure. They've had to buy all this expensive natural gas and other fossil fuels from other countries, and it's just been really difficult for them. The problem is, like, some people have been saying, like, well, we've known that Germany, has known, like, we should have been transitioning to more renewables, like we should have been updating our energy infrastructure to be more independent for years down the line. But the problem was basically that Germany perhaps became too comfortable. This is one interpretation, became too comfortable with their successes and just with how things were. And instead of being farsighted and being like, okay, let's modernize our energy infrastructure, let's make the things a little bit simpler, let's digitize administration, because that's another thing that makes things difficult and slow moving in Germany, is not having digital record keeping and stuff when it comes to business government relations. So if you want to change anything, it takes longer and it's more expensive. That all contributed to having trouble adapting basically to this big change. And on top of it, with China's economy also slowing down, and with China producing electric cars, the demand in China for German cars went down a lot too. And that's a big market for them. So it's kind of like a cocktail of different things just happen to be coming together and causing this economic challenge for Germany. But they have been able to set up some offshore natural gas ports. I think so either they can convert the liquid natural gas or so they can extract it themselves. I don't remember what those were, but basically they have moved quickly to resolve as many things as they can. They're not helpless in this situation. They're doing everything that they probably know how to do, but yeah, that's kind of the overall situation.
Yeah, when I was reading the article, it felt like it was the lesson was foundation, because it's that Germany was relying on Russia for all of that energy, for their for their gas and everything. And it's like, well, if you're gonna do that, you have to realize the cost that comes with that, and like maybe it's less financial cost, right?
Yeah.
But the cost is greater. And if your foundation isn't on something loving or something good, right? We can see that it doesn't matter, it just crumbles, right? Just will crumble beneath you, and then you do have to figure out how to build back.
Yeah, I agree with you, as Isaiah, and I think this reminds me of what we were analyzing of like the world right now and the crisis in China, in which like everyone is going to be impacted to the degree that they were involved in it. And I think when I read the story about Germany, that's what I felt directly when I started, reading. And I was surprised because like it's like, it was like the good student of Europe and all the good Western countries and things like that. So it was exemplary in terms of economy and things like that. And so I was like, what actually went wrong? And then you go into the reasons why it went wrong and the fact that they didn't update soon enough. And I do remember that when the Chancellor Angela Merkel was still in power, there was a beginning of a transition that was co-founded between like France and Germany. And then she was like, no, it's going to be at too much of a cost and too difficult at this moment. So we're going to return to our former power plants until like further notice, which was like maybe 2030, like the year 2030. And that was about it. And that was like a few years before the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And Germany was only set to like increase their economic wellness. But I guess if you don't keep house, also like clean your stuff, you're not going to be able to stay in that. It's such a good economy. And I think that's a lesson, that's a lesson for China and that's a lesson for Russia, but I think that's a lesson for a lot of Western countries as well, that even if it wasn't for like climate change issues, like we really have to modernize and start changing right now. And that's a good lesson and good example in itself, I feel.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a strong case to be made for letting go of how we've always done things. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that we see a lot of fights on both sides of the argument in terms of people wanting to change but not willing to do the work to change, and then people not wanting to change and actively fighting against the work to change. And then also what Sage and Isaiah spoke to in terms of probably a level of short-sightedness, in the sense that we become too comfortable with how things are going, and there's the assumption that they're not likely to change. And that's part of what has been probably a caveat for a lot of European countries that had trade relationships with Russia in terms of the supply of gas or energy, for the reason that there wasn't the sense that this relationship could erode through sanctions, because the supply seemed to always be there, but there wasn't the foresight of planning to move or to even have contingencies in place to say, what happens if this basket that all our eggs in that all our eggs are in drops, and we have cracked eggs that we can't then turn into an omelette.
Exactly. I love that
The
analogy.
analogies.
Yeah, I always love your analogies, Granville.
Thank you.
Yeah, but yeah, Urine, earlier, were you saying essentially what you were saying was that France and Germany were like considering an energy partnership, but Germany said no, it's because it's going to be too expensive. Is that what you
Mhm.
said?
Not exactly an energy partnership, but being like the two leaders of Europe at the time, the European Union still are, but like in a different way. Economically, there was like the need to launch a renewal of the energy sourcing, especially because like there was like a lot of talking around like getting out of the nuclear energy sources in the 2010s, and that kind of fell out because people said that it was like too costly, too expensive, or they were building new things, but like I feel like there wasn't any sense in the plan. It was really complicated, and then I don't know a lot about internal politics in Germany, but then all of a sudden one day we just heard that they're going back to like the traditional way of doing things, and I'm like, well, what about the change that was so talked about? And I don't know the details of it, but that's about it. So not a partnership, but definitely cohesive direction that they were trying to have in the first half of the 2010s, and that kind of fell apart during the second half. And I think it leads back to that short-sightedness, and I was talking about that with a colleague today. It's crazy how the human beings, I guess we react to like fear if it's instant, or like change if it's instant. And so it drives this short-sightedness that makes for like system building that are not thought out for like more than decades, or for a complete change of how we're going to live. And so we did not take into account the complete change of life that we're going to have with climate change and things like that, and the change of economies, and their exponential growth of like digital technology, things like that. And yeah, that's just about it. So I think that there's nothing more to say except that there's just this short-sightedness that we're seeing in politics, because like people react to well, what is tomorrow going to be made of, but they don't react to what 2050 is going to be made of, even though that is something that we definitely should consider as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and then definitely, I think one of the things that stood out was that they were actually had a great sense of ingenuity in progressing the industry. And then it almost seems to have come to a halt because the recipe was not replicated in other areas within the German economy and within the country in itself. So there's so things that are quite slow to adapt could have adapted at a more reasonable pace if it was a progressive change across a progressive change using the lessons learned, which is something that we probably need to remember, that there's always lessons learned, which allows the opportunity to innovate and progressively change things, as opposed to completely flipping them on their head. So, you know, I think that there's a case to be made for progressive change through lessons learned and innovations won.
I totally agree with that. And I think there's just this pattern of like wanting to, especially in politics, but other areas as well, wanting to either like change everything by like destroying and rebuilding. And that's why like extremism and far left or right movements can be so popular at this time, or staying in this kind of like, hey, we're doing good, so we're staying comfortable with not being clear of anything because it's working for us. It's kind of making me feel of the situation with like the automakers union in Detroit, which is our next story. And the fact that basically what happens that the union, the UAW, is that it, was having basically a political agenda, if we can say so, about like maintaining the industry in a state of chaos and distress and comfortable fogginess, just so they could keep on making their agenda progress without having the automakers and other people looking too precisely at what they were doing, I guess, and other things like that. So I think it's not a surprise to anyone how union can be politicized today, but it feels like it completely defies what it was made for, which was not to be in an extensive opposition to an enterprise leader, a company leader. It was just to denounce like bad conditions of work. And after the bad conditions of work were like resolved, like going into a partnership in order to progress. And so an advocacy as well for like progressive change that really didn't happen, and that is being exposed with the situation of like everyone is like protecting their interests. And it doesn't make any sense except that the result is that it's making more people suffer than doing any good. So yeah, how do you guys feel about, just this situation in general, and just like the relationship between unions and companies?
So I think part of the thing that we probably don't always delve into is that unions have always been part of political agendas in one form or another, for the reason that they are probably people, they have been people that are much more capable of mobilizing people, because people are looking for representation, and generally union leaders tend to be quite charismatic, even if they're serving their own agendas. And the human condition is that we tend to want to follow charismatic people. And so specific, like if I take South Africa from a unionized point of view, the unions afford workers protections and representation under the law that individual workers would have very little power in using to advance their individual causes. So again, that the caveat of strength in the masses, unions generally have the masses of the working class. And because they have the masses of the working class, they generally have very strong relationships with political parties, and in that way advance political agendas. Having said that, they've also been used as the sharp end of the stick in terms of almost bringing change and fighting against and bringing people down to what we would say size. So again, you almost have this sense that you don't want to antagonize the union. But the issue is there's often the space where the union is not necessarily concerned about antagonizing you as an employer or as a company or even just in a political sphere. So we have lots of very militant unions that have to be called to order a lot. But on the other side, they've also supported and brought about a real change in the lives of masses that they represent. So, it's a caveat, like, it's a two-edged sword. Like half a dozen of really bad versus half a dozen of hectic negotiating. The fact of the matter is they're probably a necessary evil. The issue is, what agenda are they serving?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think you put it really well, like that the purpose of unions is to negotiate basically with companies to secure workers' rights and make sure that the employees are they're being valued properly and that they have benefits and protections that they need. And yeah, like you said, collective bargaining is a lot more powerful than just individuals coming to the companies. But yeah, I feel like with a lot of strikes and stuff like that, or just with unions in general, I feel like, there's a really strong, there's this really strong current of us versus them mentality that I think really can mess things up. And I think it can even lead to corruption in unions, because the UAW, the Auto Workers Union, actually had a couple of its former leaders sentenced to some prison time for corruption, so before the current leader of the union. So I feel like what breeds the corruption is the feeling that this, how do you put, that the union leader is your savior almost. This is our leader, this is our fearless leader who leads us in our crusade against the greedy, heartless, corporate, parasites or whatever. And, that kind of leaves room, that attitude, it kind of they can do no wrong type of attitude, because we have this enemy that we need to be completely against. So that mentality kind of opens up, it creates a lack of scrutiny, and it kind of allows corruption, basically, is what I'm saying. And I feel like it's not an accident that there's been a lot of corruption throughout the history of unions. Not all unions being like that, and not all the time, but it's because of that. There's this total war, us versus them mentality, when you shouldn't, it's not really healthy to approach someone like that. And it's much healthier to not automatically treat someone as, they're going to be completely opposed to our interests and they're our enemy. You know what I mean? I just feel like that's problematic. But Yureen, were you saying that, were you mentioning that the UAW had been trying to make things unstable and chaotic in the long term for the auto manufacturers, or just during the strike? I didn't.
I don't know. It's not most of all during the strike.
Oh,
Trying
okay.
to make reputation damage from what I was feeling, which
Yeah.
was bringing the point of unions. Some unions are really good. We have a culture of union everywhere in France, and totally not against it. I'm pretty much all for it. Negotiating workers' rights and things like that. The thing was the means to come to your results should be under scrutiny and under an ethical type of work. And this kind of aggressive campaign of reputation damage doesn't feel good to me. And I guess it joins, and it was during the strike, right? I don't know their history that much. I guess it joins your point of view around like really the resentment that you have about your workplace when you're in the union, which really doesn't make sense. Like in terms of like spiritual choice, like you're choosing to work there for a reason. It's not perfect, but you have to agree to the culture of your workplace, right? And so being in a state of constant resentment is really not healthy. And I think someone was expressing that maybe because like the messages were leaked from the UAW, but it was really like he was saying that it was really disappointing, especially when we want to have a situation settled for the employees first, and yeah, maybe like, I don't know, maybe like having a shorter strike, a really ethical way of doing things wouldn't have changed the results for employees in a fast way, but keeping them in the distress, confusion, like stopped state is not going to do any good either, because the decisions going out of that are not going to be the ones that you were looking for, and maybe it's going to put the industry in a difficult position, which will certainly prove to slow down the progress for employee rights in like future years. And again, it's like this short-sighted political view that I think we're pointing out today, where it's like, hey, like in the future, would that be beneficial? Wouldn't that be beneficial to partner now and feel like this healthy development of like worker, like employee-employer relationship? Even though it doesn't seem like we're ever going to win big this year, maybe we'll win big on the long term instead of like winning big this year and then crashing down with a scandal or just like people getting fired massively or things like that, So yeah, that was my feeling.
So one of the things that's generally a concern for me with unions is that they often abuse their mandates. So they are mandated by the constituents to negotiate at a certain level and to allow for certain sacrifices in order to gain things in other places. And as I speak from the perspective of having been part of a negotiating team for a company. So the union walks in with an employee mandate, we walk in with the bank's mandate. And what you would find is that some of the union representatives were our employees. And once they felt like they had been taken care of, then they started to actually negotiate on behalf of their constituents. So, that level of almost abuse of power because they have the employees' mandate was definitely coming through in a very self-serving way. And I think that's what you were speaking to in terms of just what agenda, again, it's what agenda are they serving? And is it serving the greater good and the greater need of the people that they're meant to be representing? Or is it open to abuse? And I have seen it open to abuse. I've also seen it where it's not open to abuse. There are some people that are that you're very comfortable to discuss and negotiate conditions with, to discuss and negotiate increases with. And then there's other people that have no economical sense, and so they put a number on the table that you look at and you go, well, in order to give you this number, we are going to have to cut jobs in places and things like that. And, they just never quite see the full picture. And so this automobile workers union sounds like they're creating a whole lot of havoc, but it's literally serving an agenda of destabilizing that industry in those states, which doesn't serve the purpose, that doesn't serve a great purpose for anybody if that industry is destabilized. The fact of the matter is, those workers, as much as they may be resentful of certain working conditions, are also economically dependent on those roles, on those jobs. And so if you have a union that's destabilizing an industry, who are they actually benefiting?
Yeah, and I think it's not to say that the conditions at work or like the values, the core values of the company are like all white and pure and innocent, and that they wouldn't, you know, prioritize money over people. But if you go into the sense of like trying to overtake or of trying to like claim something that is not due to you, not due to the value that you create and the work and the reality of the economy right now, you're definitely going to create a more unstable and, quite honestly, very toxic environment for anyone involved. So not just financially, but also like emotionally for people. And I think that's what the article was pointing out. So it was like the disturbing, like wounded, he used this word, wounded, yeah, wounded, that's how it's pronounced. This the strategy of keeping people wounded for months, just so you could edge them on and get what you want. That's really, really unhealthy and not okay. And that should really like, there should really be boundaries put in place for everyone involved, like not to give everything to union and not to give everything to the employer, but just like, you know, having a relationship or like, you know, a relationship where you give, you receive, like, and you adjust when it doesn't feel good, you know. So yeah, that's that's how I see it. So do you want to say something else about it?
Yeah, I think also like just for anyone in any situation of work, like regardless of like your work conditions and everything, and how your employer treats you or what their values are, like we all have a piece to heal of, yeah, just like, yeah, like resentment of work basically. So you can have like really great working conditions and everything's good. You can still be like resentful of work or of your employer anyway. And maybe partly because like you don't really want to be doing that work. Maybe like you want to be doing something different because your purpose is different, but that's not on them, that's on you. So you're the one who's responsible for moving toward what you actually want to do and working through your challenges. It doesn't do you any good to just resent your employer, you know, for the place that you're in, you know, on your journey. And I think that's like the deeper issue. If there's not that though, like if there's not that resentment, but you're pointing out the working conditions that like aren't good and need to change, I feel like then you have a lot of power, because like the resentment is weak and everyone knows it. And that's why people sometimes don't like unions, because of that, you know, mentality. And sometimes people, especially in America, because America's very like overall like a hardworking like culture, you know, they're just like, stop complaining, you know. But no matter what culture or country you're in, like the resentment and the antagonism is never going to help you, and it's never going to make you powerful. You know, it's only from that place of peace. But you can still say your working conditions aren't adequate too. Like that's absolutely healthy, you know. So
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. People haven't like unions are born for like from really bad, working condition in the 19th century, beginning of 20th century. I think it's just a matter of like really humbling yourself and saying like, hey, I may be an expert and I know a lot of things, but right now I need to know how to communicate with my time, to communicate healthily, to have healthy boundaries, to have peaceful communication. And that's not a work that just unions should do, but if no one is doing it, then we're just going to stay into anger and strikes and protests and probably not getting that much out of it that we hoped. So yeah. And again, like it's going to hurt for workers first. And that's the sad reality about that. And we need to keep that in mind. Like it's just not our agenda. It's going to like what's best for the workers, And with that, I feel like it's a good transition to like talking a little bit about the US government shutdown, even though we don't have all the elements quite yet. But it's basically a story about a few institutions not listing their bills or paying their bills or like getting transparent with their spendings on time, which blocks Congress in terms of like trying to allocate a budget for each of them for the new year, something like that. And so this goes into like a government shutdown, and the shutdown policies haven't been like are not updated for right now for a lot of institutions, which means that again, like the workers will suffer because a lot of institutions in the military, law enforcement, Congress, national parks, museum, and a whole lot of other like public services will continue to operate and work, but not be paid, basically. So yeah, I wonder like how did we get to this state? And especially like the Senate and House of Representatives are not at all agreeing on something to arrange the situation right now, which is just delaying the solution and will probably like hurt the workers more. So, but at the same time, like, what is the best solution? Like, maybe like no one knows at this time. So, yeah, kind of taking stock a little bit about this situation, and we'll probably continue to talk about it as it evolves next week.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say it looks like the main issue with it too is immigration. So in the House of Representatives, there's a majority of Republicans, and the more like Republicans who are taking a harder line stance are saying like they want immigration reforms and more appropriation for like more reinforcement of the US-Mexico border wall. They want those to be attached to the government spending bill, basically. And the Senate is like has a Democratic majority. So, it's a divided government. So they're probably not going to approve that because they don't want tighter immigration restrictions and everything like that for whatever reasons, which we can discuss. And yeah, it's just interesting. And I feel like for me, the first thing that comes up is, so if you have a government, okay, and your government is responsible for running essential services to the functioning of your country, how does it make sense to attach a controversial policy decision that has nothing to do with the daily operation of your government to your basic government functions funding? How does that make any sense? That's the question I'm asking. To me, I feel like what would be most rational is to propose some sort of measure where you can't do that. like we have to separately agree to fund these basic government functions, because it's not acceptable for our basics not to be covered. And it's kind of, it's kind of like, yeah, it reminds me of like what we were saying earlier, because Jeff mentioned this once. He was saying like countries can have disputes with each other, but they should never like invade each other just to try to settle their disputes. Like with Russia and Ukraine, I feel like this is similar, because you're going for you're trying to hit where it really hurts. You're trying to create this ultimatum and take the country hostage over these issues that have nothing to do with the basic function of our country. So I just don't think that that's cool. And I don't think either party should do that. And they'll have like these like giant bills, and somewhere embedded in them, they'll have something in there called riders. They're called that because it's a little provision that kind of rides on a bigger bill. And the rider has nothing to do with the bigger bill. So it says like, we're agreeing that, I don't know, all street signs should, be made of this material and be this size, and we're going to translate them into Spanish by 2050 or whatever. And also we're going to put this little piece in there also about abortion. We're just going to just throw that in there. Like that's a thing in US government. You guys, I don't know if that's a thing in France or South Africa, but I just feel like we really need to be disciplined there, because we just don't need this for our survival. We've got to have some common ground. Yeah, I know.
I think even in terms of like, even if it was related to founding is due in 4 days. This is the time for making sure founding is put out on time. You do your changes next year. Founding is put out on time, So where is the priority in this? And then there's also like a story about like, what does it have to do? And so again, like pushing a political agenda where you see an opening, so a sign of weakness where you could potentially have gains. And it is definitely not okay. So like a lack of priority, a lot of like short seeing, I guess, as well. And yeah, just like not cool and needing like discipline in there. I don't think it happens in France like that. The laws are too strict, but it's kind of the same when it's the summer and nobody's there, and they just try to pass bills that nobody cares about or don't agree to in the summer when nobody's listening, or like not a lot of representative are like there to kind of argue with it. So yeah, I don't know, it's just it feels very, very bad. Like your whole country is going to be on stop. People are not going to be paid. Dude, like wake up.
So I feel like it speaks to the same thing that we alluded to in the union story. It's this trading in bad faith thing. So, and literally, Sage, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said you're holding the country hostage by withholding your agreement to something that is literally essential. It kind of feels oddly malicious. So what is going to serve the greater good under these circumstances? The fact of the matter is a functioning country is going to serve the greater good. So having riders and being underhanded serves nobody. And what's worse is you will start to find that the skills and resources that you need in those very government departments that you're now expecting people to work with no pay or go on furlough will start to look for roles in the private sector because they don't have funding issues. The fact of the matter is your political agenda does not put food on somebody's table. And in this instance, it's actually taking food off of somebody's table. And so again, you have to ask the question of what purpose are they serving? And whose agenda are they actually pushing, and at whose expense? And right now it sounds like it's at the country's expense. So I agree that there should be a legal mechanism to stop that kind of bad trade politicking.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the ridiculousness that we're seeing, I guess, in American politics right now. Not all ridiculousness, right? But it's just this feeling of like we're in the show and we've totally lost sight of what's going on. Like internal politics, like you should worry about internal politics first. Your country needs you, and we need that funding, for basic stuff in a country. And I feel like, I don't know, like politics, like they let themselves being taken into this whirlwind of like campaigns and fights and tension. And besides the tension, like you still have a country to rule. Like it's not going to stop for a year while you do your elections, and I've always find this energy a bit weird in election year for the US, but like election months for France. And it's like, hey, your country still needs you, and yeah.
It's like watching a movie and the actors there's no plot, there isn't a plot twist. They just lose the plot. So a drama turns into a comedy and you're wondering what the hell happened.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say they're to blame. It comes from the animosity that people have in the partisanship, because on both sides, or in general, like it's up to us to heal this. So we're disagreeing with people, but we don't have like animosity toward them, and we're not giving our power away to them, because the more animosity there is, the more these, I mean, this has been happening this entire like century, so, and maybe probably before, but still it's something to heal, where you don't feel the need to have these like really harmful tactics. That comes from animosity. Whereas the opposite of that, like if you're peaceful and you have respect and civility, you wouldn't do that. You would say, we're going to take care of our basic needs first, and then we can debate on these other things, because we're civil and we're respectful and we care about each other and ourselves, instead of being like, kamikaze, like I'll do anything to pass this law, like, we're gonna go up in flames for this. It's like, does every single law have to be that way? No, right?
Kamikaze.
Yeah.
No, yeah, we do it in good faith. Yeah, in good faith for our country, it's for our country, and we have a sense of priority. And I think it's really important to have that, just like union and companies. There is nothing wrong with having unions, and there is nothing wrong with having employees. Partisanship is actually like a healthy relationship of politics and government, if you remove all the nonsense that we see every day. But adding the nonsense onto it, you're like, well, what is it's like it's losing its how can I say this? It's like it's losing its primary function of making the relationship in the country flow, Like if partisanship is malfunctioning, the country as a complex individual is malfunctioning as well. And I think it's a pretty intense but eye-opening barometer of how the tensions between people in the country right now. So yeah.
So maybe politics should leave the drama and comedy to Hollywood.
Oh, that's a
Nice.
great transition. That's a good transition.
Applaud, I applaud, yeah. Hollywood, which needs a new dose of comedy and drama, it seems. Yeah, we're talking about culture last, and a little bit of fun, but also very, very linked to what we've been talking about today. And it's basically that, Martin Scorsese, do you say Scorsese, you guys, or do you say Scorsese? Scorsese. So Martin Scorsese basically said that the industry is dying because like we don't have any new concepts of movies in Hollywood, and probably like the economy is too much about the industry is too much about making money right now. And I had a lot of thoughts about that because I'm teaching my students about like film music scores right now. And ever since like people realized with Hitchcock in the 60s that playing music to kind of make people remember a movie, marketing teams have been all about putting music as a way to gain money in the industry. But I guess it wasn't like the core of making a movie. But I think like what we're experiencing right now, 60 years later, is that we've become an industry where everything is about making money and having audiences before the art, before the message, before the writers even. And that's why like writers don't have like basic needs and workers' rights being respected right now, even though they make like movies that should sell like in the box office. And so we have a literacy, like we have blockbusters, right? And I mean, like obviously it's pretty exhilarating to have that kind of power and say like, hey, my movie is going to make millions, billions. But by employing marketing tactics inside the movie for people to stay, you kind of lose the sense of originality of a movie as well. And maybe that's where like movies kind of feel like repetitive, kind of feel the same. And I think that's what it was pointing to.
Yeah, it's interesting because before Jeff shared that article, when he was chatting with us and the social impact team, on Saturday that came up independently between Isaiah and me. I remember we were driving and talking about the movie October Sky. It's like, it was an American movie from 1999. It was about the childhood of a NASA engineer. And this guy was like the son of a coal miner in West Virginia, like the coal capital of the US, at least at the time. And his dad was like, no, you're going to become a coal miner like me. And he was like, no, I'm going to become a rocket scientist. And he pursues like rocketry and goes, does a state science fair competition or something like that. And, that he follows his dreams, and his dad's eventually like, oh, I respect your decision. That's awesome. And it was just such a like beautiful, touching movie. It was artistic. The aesthetic was on point. It was just beautiful. It's a cherished memory for so many American students because Isaiah watched it in school.
Like we would watch it in school a lot, and I was like, this is a good movie.
I know.
You never get to watch good movies in school. It's always those like weird documentaries.
Yeah, yeah, they're just like weird documentaries from the 90s
Yeah,
or even
But it made you
earlier.
feel something. It was cool because we hadn't talked about that before, and it was something that we both remember growing up and like loving that movie. And like right now, if you were like, I love the movies, but I don't want to go because I know if I go, I'm just gonna see a dud. Like there's nothing good in the
Yeah.
movies anymore. And like,
Yeah.
but like 20 years ago, which damn, that makes me feel old when I was 13.
You're not old.
Like I feel like I would go to the movies and actually be like, oh, I could see something good. I remember seeing the movie Signs in the movie theater, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
was a good
The
movie.
Alien movie.
Yeah, like that
Mm.
was good.
Yeah.
But there's like nothing really that feels like that recently.
Right. That's like, it's like a piece of art that reaches into your soul and your heart. And it's maybe not perfect, but it's like, it's of substance. All these other
Yeah,
movies,
there's a lot of substance.
there's no characters. The characters don't exist. They are just pawns in a plot. And it's just beautiful special effects, which are awesome, but it's all icing and no cake. And
That's brilliant. I love that. That just sums it up, right?
yeah, and so we want to talk about why is this the case and what is this showing us? Yeah.
So I feel like part of it is this sense of, or this requirement for instant gratification. So, the push of the adrenaline, the literally out of this world special effects that are just not realistic is like literally this, it's almost an opium for the brain. It's like this is like lots of escapism in a lot of these high adrenaline movies where there's a lot of people avoiding their emotions, and that's why more substance or content rich movies haven't done so well. It's like we live in an age where if you just wait a few weeks, some person will have randomly taken some or other cam into a theater and downloaded the movie, and you can go and you can scrape it off some or other torrent site and watch it, even if it's not a great copy, because eventually you'll find a great copy on that same torrent site. So there's a lot of little nuances happening that you start to just wonder if Martin Scorsese is actually right. Has the art of film died, or has it evolved to the extent that the people that are looking for content rich are not going to find it in the place that they're looking for it?
Yeah, I think even like I struggle to find interesting things to watch on Netflix and Disney Plus even. Maybe because I'm very sensitive and I have a tendency to drop a series forever if it doesn't feel good when other people would power through to get to the good stuff. And I have this problem with like the new Disney live actions and Barbie and even Oppenheimer. I love a good historical film. But it's like, are we trying to respond to this day and age want, or is the writer free to express a personal story through characters that anyone can understand? And I'm trying to like teach that to my students, and they hate the music that I pass at the beginning, and then they're like, oh my gosh, this French, he had double entendre, and we don't know if he was talking about his family or the society, and he had death and he has emotions, and he wasn't trying to please anyone. It was just him, and it was so beautiful and touching because of that. Though weird, that's the thing, and that's a beauty of, yeah. That's all I had to
So
say.
we have reached our hour. So any concluding thoughts in a couple of seconds? Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for the conversation. Thank you to the people that have been following us and liking and subscribing to our channel. Also, to anybody that hasn't already, please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.